Everyone watched, only one man moved. The wagon tongue had snapped clean at the iron collar, not cracked, not bent, snapped, and the near wheel had sunk 6 inches into the shoulder mud, while the mule stood blowing through his nose and looking back at the wreck like he wasn't sure how any of this was his fault. I counted 11 men in the street. I know because I counted. Old habit. You look at a crowd the way you look at a hillside, not for what's there, but for what moves and what doesn't. 11 men on the main plank of Harrow Creek on a Tuesday morning, and not one of them moved toward the wagon. They stood with their thumbs hooked in their belts or their coffee cups warm in their hands, watching the woman try to muscle the tongue back up out of the mud single-handed. She had her skirts knotted sideways into her waistband to keep them clear. She was trying to get purchase on the underframe, and every time she pushed, the wheel sank another half-inch and the mule stepped sideways and undid whatever she'd gained. I set my coffee on the rail of Dolly's porch and walked over. Didn't say anything to her, not right off. You don't talk a man through lifting something heavy, and it's the same with a woman. I got my shoulder under the near corner of the tongue, found the angle and pushed. She felt it give and she shifted her grip to the wheel rim and we got the nose up out of the mud together. The mule leaned into the traces to help, which is how you know a mule's had a decent life. He'll work with you when the odds shift in your favor. Hold it, I said, and she did. I wedged a flat stone I'd spotted from 30 feet away under the wheel and kicked it seated. The wagon stopped sinking. Then she said, "Thank you." I looked at her then. Maybe 30 years old, maybe 35. Dark hair that had come loose on one side. A jaw that was set the way jaws get set when you've been doing things alone for long enough that asking for help doesn't come naturally anymore. She had mud on her left sleeve past the elbow, and a split across the web of her right thumb that had bled and dried, and she hadn't bothered with it. "You got a spare tongue?" I asked. "In the bed, I've replaced it before." "I know," I said. "I watched you try to do it by yourself." She looked at me levelly, not annoyed, just taking stock. I went around to the tailgate and pulled out the spare, good straight hardwood, heavier than the broken one, which meant she'd been planning ahead, and we got to work. No one else came over. I noticed that without particularly caring about it. You stop expecting much from a crowd when you get to a certain point in your life, and Harrow Creek wasn't a town known for breeding men who moved fast when a stranger needed help. The kind of place where people watched and sorted out the story to tell later. I'd lived in 20 towns like it, and I'd stopped resenting it the way I had when I was young. What I noticed instead was how she worked. She knew the job. She handed me the draw pin before I asked for it, positioned the collar brace without being told, and when I said hold, she held, and when I said let go easy, she let go easy. We fitted the tongue and set the iron in about 20 minutes. The mule approved, or at least stopped sighing. "You headed north or south?" I asked. "North," she said, "the Rafter T homestead, above the Milk Creek Fork." I knew that place, empty 3 seasons. That's 9 miles and the second creek is high. "I know that too," she said. I picked up my hat from the mud where I'd set it and knocked it against my knee. "I'll ride out ahead and check the crossing." She looked at me the way she had before, that same level look. "You don't need to." "I know I don't," I said. Her name was Cora Hallett. She'd bought the Rafter T sight unseen with money from her sister's estate, and a stubbornness that, I gathered over the next 9 miles, had sustained her through a number of things a person probably shouldn't have to carry alone. She didn't volunteer much and I didn't ask much. We talked about the land. She had opinions about the grass and the watershed that were better than most homesteaders I'd met, men or women. She'd been reading, she said. Getting ready. She'd been getting ready for 2 years. The Milk Creek ford was high but not dangerous if you knew the line. I rode it first, and she watched how I picked it. Then she drove through with the mule on a slack line and the water not quite reaching the boards. On the far bank, she stopped the wagon and looked back at the crossing like she was memorizing it. "My name is Harlan Crees. I've said it maybe 1,000 times in my life and never once thought about it, but I thought about it that afternoon, the way it sat in my mouth, A plain name, a not particularly notable name. I'd worn it for 53 years and done a reasonable amount with it and been reasonably forgotten everywhere I'd done it. I ran cattle for Dahlin Brothers out of Harrow Creek. Good honest work. Nobody's enemy. Nobody's particular friend either. We got to the Rafter Tea about 4 in the afternoon, and the first thing we both saw was that the north corner of the barn roof had caved in over the winter, probably under snow load, and the main house door was standing open, which meant the hinges had rusted off their screws. She sat on the wagon seat and looked at it for a moment, not crushed. She didn't have that look, just making a new calculation the way you do. I can have the barn corner patched in 2 days, I said. The door's an hour's work. She turned and looked at me, and this time it was different from the level stock-taking look she'd had on the street. Quieter, maybe, like she was deciding something that wasn't about the barn or the door. "Why are you doing this?" she said. I had to think about that, which is never a good sign. Men who know why they're doing something don't have to think about it. "I had the time," I said, which was true. "You had the time in the street too," she said, "and so did 11 other men." I climbed down off my horse and looped the reins on the hitching ring by the barn and said, "Let's look at the roof." She laughed, just once, short and almost surprised, like she hadn't planned to. Then she climbed down and followed me around to the north wall. I come back to that laugh more than anything else. Not because it was some grand turning point, or because I read something into it that wasn't there. Just because it was real, and at that point in my life I was a man who didn't run into many real things and was aware of the drought. I spent 2 days at the Rafter Tea. I patched the barn corner with lumber from her wagon bed, and some half-rotted boards from the old linta that were sound enough at the core. I rehung the door, which was good thick pine and wanted to stay plumb once you let it. I found a cracked water pipe behind the kitchen wall that she didn't know about, and I found it because the grass behind the house was green in a stripe where it shouldn't have been, and I'd seen that sign before. I fixed it with material from my saddlebag. I carry more than most men think necessary, which has always struck me as a reasonable policy. Each evening she made supper and we ate at the table that had come with the place, an old square-legged table that had been there since whoever built the house, and we talked. Really talked, the kind that doesn't happen much when you get to 53. About where she'd grown up, the eastern counties, the winters that stacked ice on the windowsills. About her sister, who'd been the one with plans and had died without getting to use most of them. About the grass on this particular stretch of plain, and whether it would run cattle or would do better as grain land. She thought grain mixed views, and her reasoning was better than mine. She asked me once what I'd wanted to be when I was young, and I had to think again, which seemed to be a habit she was giving me. "I wanted to be the kind of man who didn't need much," I said. "I got that, I suppose." She was quiet for a minute and then she said, "That's a thing you choose or a thing that happens to you. Isn't always the same." I ate some more of her soup, which was good, a thick clear broth with the kind of flavor that takes a real cook to produce out of simple materials. I thought about that distinction for the next 3 or 4 days, and I think she was right, and I think I knew which one mine was. On the 3rd morning I told her the work was done, and I should ride back. She said all right. I got my horse and saddled him. She stood at the hitching ring while I cinched up, and when I turned to say my goodbye she had something in her hand, a piece of paper folded in thirds. "That's a letter," she said, "to the land office at Harrow Creek. I need to file a formal occupancy claim and I need a witness signature, someone who can attest I'm in residence and improving the property. You could take it in." I looked at the letter. I could take it in. "And if you wanted to come back next week," she said, watching the middle distance somewhere past my left shoulder, "I have a section of fence on the east side that needs restringing. I haven't got the post weight for it alone." "I'll come back," I said. She looked at me then. "You don't have to." "I know," I said. That was the 2nd time. It was starting to feel like something we knew about each other, the acknowledgement that neither of us was owed anything by the other, and we were doing it anyway. That's a particular kind of honesty that's rarer than people think. Most dealings between people carry some kind of accounting underneath, some running tally of what's owed and what's been given. This didn't. She didn't ask because she needed rescuing. I didn't offer because I needed to be needed, or not exactly. I offered because when you have a thing you're good at and there's a clear use for it, turning away from that use has always felt like waste to me. I filed her letter at the land office. I rode back the next week. That fall was the driest in 4 years, which was bad, and it was followed by a winter that was the hardest in 10, which was worse. The Rafter T's north pasture flooded twice in spring from the snowmelt and drained slow because of the clay pan underneath. I know all of this now in the way you know land you've worked. I came to know it by being there. I kept my room above Dolly's in Harrow Creek through October. By November, I wasn't sleeping there most nights. By December, she had asked me plainly if I intended to keep riding 9 miles each way in the dark every other day, and I said if she had an alternate proposal, I was open to hearing it. And that was the longest conversation we had that didn't have a practical subject, and also the shortest we needed. I moved my things out to the Rafter T on a Saturday. It was 17 degrees, and there was a hard north wind that made the horses mean and the work miserable. We got everything inside, and she made coffee, and we sat at the old square-leg table and looked at each other across it. 2 people who had decided something, and were sitting with the weight of having decided it. "I'm going to be honest with you," she said. "Go ahead," I said. "I'm not easy to live with. My sister said so, and she was right." "I'm not easy either," I said. "I have opinions about how things are done." "So do I," she said. "I know," I said. She put her hand on the table, not reaching for mine, just placing it there. Her hands were good hands, capable, with that split across the right thumb healed to a fine scar now. I put my hand over hers. That was it. That was the whole ceremony, if you want to call it that. I'm not sure what I'd have done with something more. I'd been a plain man in a plain life, and I think if the moment had been large and decorated, I wouldn't have known what to do with it. This I knew what to do with. You hold on. We had the formal church wedding in March, which she wanted and I didn't mind, and which the pastor of the Harrow Creek Methodist Church conducted with more enthusiasm than the crowd of maybe 15 people warranted. But he was that kind of man. Her neighbor from 2 ranches north, a widow named Tetch, cried. My foreman from Dahlin Brothers shook my hand afterward and said, "Son, I had you pegged wrong," which was about the nicest thing he'd ever said to me, and he looked uncomfortable having said it. By spring, I'd given notice at Dahlin Brothers and filed my own land papers on the adjacent section east of the Rafter T. The grass there was better for cattle, and the east fence held water in a way that would let us run a small herd without hauling. By midsummer, we had 23 head, and she was keeping the books, which she did better than I would have. The Rafter T people watched all of this happen. Not Harrow Creek people, Rafter T people. That's how it goes out here. You're not from a town, you're from your land, and the surrounding ranches become your world. The Andover family to the south, the Tetch widow, a young couple called Briggs who'd come in from Kansas with more hope than sense but were learning. They came to know us. They came to know what Cora knew about grass and yield, and they came to know that when something needed doing and there was a question about who was going to do it, you sent someone to Harrow Creek's place first. That suited me. I don't need a title. I never needed a title. What I needed, and had not had for a long stretch of my life, was work that mattered and someone who saw that it mattered. Those are 2 different needs, and I hadn't understood that the second one was a need at all until I had it. October now, 2nd year. Evening comes early and there's wood smoke in it and the cold that gets in under your collar and makes your joints feel their age. I'm 55 years old, and my left knee is a thing I have to manage in the mornings, and my eyes aren't what they were for reading in low light, and none of that bothers me as much as it would have once. Because once those were things, a man counted against himself, and now they're just conditions. We're sitting on the porch on two chairs we moved out from the kitchen, because the kitchen has gotten warm enough to push us outdoors. The fire inside is doing its work. The last of the daylight is going flat and gray across the north pasture, and the cattle are shapes in it. She's reading something, a pamphlet from the agricultural office about winter forage, and she's making marks in the margins with a pencil stub she keeps behind her right ear. I've got a piece of trace leather I'm oiling, because it's that time of year when you do it before you need to, not after. She reaches over without looking up from the pamphlet and puts her hand on my forearm for a moment. Just a moment. The kind of touch that doesn't mean anything particular and means everything. I look at the north pasture, my fence line running straight to the draw posts I set myself, wire I strung with these hands, 23 cattle in the last of the light, wood smoke on the air, her pencil scratching in the margin. I worked for 30 years before someone placed a hand on me like that, like a thing held and not merely used, like the answer to a question I'd stopped asking. I keep oiling the leather, the light goes. Inside the fire pops once, settling. The wind off the plain is cold and clean, the kind that's been across 500 miles of nothing and gets to you honest. This is what I wanted to be, I think, not someone who didn't need much, someone who was worth staying beside. The pencil scratches, her shoulder is warm against mine. I oil the leather,